It's a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, David Mathisen. Dave's an old friend, spoken at CPAK several times, knows more about mythology than anybody I've ever met, and he led the Tour of the Stars just a couple CPAKs ago. Hopefully he'll do that again for us sometime. But in the meantime, please welcome Dave Mathisen.
Thank you, Walter. Thanks so much to Walter and the Cruttenden family and the extended CPAK team. It's been a really wonderful conference, and I've enjoyed meeting everybody. My name is David Mathisen, and I've been exploring the connection between the myths and the stars, and I'm just going to get right into it. Today I'm going to be talking a little bit about what I think this connection means. If you want to go in to see more background supporting evidence, I have books that total about 5,000 pages now and 1,100 blog posts that you can find for free on my blog site, on my website, Star Myths of the World, and also dozens of videos. But Alvin Boyd Kuhn once said that the sacred scriptures of the world are 1,000 times more precious as myth than as alleged history. They're not about literal historical figures, they're actually about us. Kuhn says that ancient myth is the drama of our history here and now, and it's not apprehended in its full force and applicability until every reader discerns himself or herself to be the central figure in it. That sounds so profound, but what does it actually mean? How can these ancient stories filled with monsters and heroes and gods and goddesses be about us? How can they have anything to do with us? I want to believe Kuhn when he says that we have to see ourselves as the central figure in the myths, but how do we understand that? If the myths are about your story, what's the plot of that story? What's the dramatic tension in the story? What does that story involve? Well, according to the ancient myths, your story involves trauma. What does that mean? The myths don't actually use that exact word, trauma. It's a modern word. It's from the study of psychology, and it actually didn't start being used in this kind of psychological way until fairly recently, the mid-1970s, according to Dr. Peter Levine, who's a recognized expert in the field and an authority on the subject of trauma. And as he says in one of his many books on the subject, trauma is the most avoided, ignored, denied, misunderstood, and untreated cause of human suffering. That sounds pretty important. The most untreated cause of human suffering. He continues, "For now, I will simply say that almost all of us have experienced trauma. Some form of trauma, directly or indirectly. In short, trauma is about loss of connection to ourselves, to our bodies, to our families, to others, and to the world around us. A loss of connection to ourselves." Now, why is trauma the most avoided, ignored, denied, misunderstood, and untreated cause of human suffering? Because in most cases, we don't even realize that we're disconnected from ourselves. Dr. Gabor Mate, I've just recently discovered Dr. Gabor Mate. After I've written these 5,000 pages, I've started listening to Dr. Gabor Mate. I said, this is exactly what the ancient myths are talking about. But Dr. Gabor Mate is one of the most revered voices on the subject of trauma and addiction. And he says that we don't even often know that we have trauma, but the consequences can be devastating. He's convinced that trauma is at the heart of virtually all addiction. In fact, he says all addiction. And it's at the heart of anxiety and depression and even chronic physical illnesses, because there's obviously a mind-body connection. But when you're anxious all the time, your body actually starts producing various hormones, fight or flight type mechanisms that are helpful, but not if they're going all the time, and it can have devastating effects. So, and he also says that one of the reasons we don't know that we have trauma is because we think that trauma is something bad that happened to you. And you say, well, in my childhood, I didn't have anything bad happen to me. It could also be, Dr. Gabor-Mate explains, it could also be something that didn't happen to you that can also cause this disconnection from yourself. So, and it results in that disconnection for yourself. So how do the myths talk about trauma? Well, we know that there are many, many myths about a dying god or a dying goddess. Everybody has heard some mention of the Osiris cycle. It's a god that dies and goes down into the underworld and has to be searched for diligently. The missing god or the lost god or the dying god, or it could be a goddess. The goddess Persephone in ancient Greece, Tammuz in ancient Mesopotamia, the Balder cycle in the Norse myths. There's a Lakota story of a figure named Rabbit Boy, who's a handsome young man who comes into the village, and then he gets thrown into a cooking pot, and then he gets dismembered, but then he comes back. It's the same pattern as the Osiris. Osiris gets cut up into 14 parts, right, and scattered, and Isis has to look for him. There's also the pattern, not necessarily of a dying god or goddess, but the god or goddess or figure who withdraws and then comes back. In ancient Japan, the goddess Amaterasu, she withdraws and then she comes back, and then all the other kami have to bring her back. Also, in the story of the Iliad, Achilles withdraws from the battlefield. I would argue that Achilles is actually the higher self. Patroclus is his lower self. Patroclus is not as good of a warrior as Achilles, but and Achilles has a lot of sun characteristics, like the sun. Same with Amaterasu, is a sun goddess. So I'm convinced that this dying god or goddess relates to trauma and our lost self, our lost connection with the self, but we can regain that connection with the self. And actually, I also am quite convinced that the cycle of precession is used by the ancient myths to dramatize disconnection, displacement. In fact, so here we have Osiris, the dying god, in Hamlet's Mill, very seminal book, Hamlet's Mill. The authors of Hamlet's Mill and also Jane B. Sellers in Death of Gods in Ancient Egypt point out that the slaying of Osiris by his brother Set is accomplished by Set along with 72 henchmen. And we know that that is one of the most foundational of precessional numbers. The motion of precession delays the background of stars by 1 degree every 71.6 years. So instead of having Set and his 71.6 companions, they had 72 companions. But it's a very precise connection to precession. It delays the background of stars by 1 degree every 72 years, such that after a great number of years, 2,160 if you use 72, slightly different if you use 71.6, one constellation will usurp the place of the other constellation on the expected day. So that's why it's dramatized as one slaying the other or taking the place of the other constellation. It's a displacement, a disconnection. So precession can have to do with displacement and disconnection, just like the dying god of Osiris. But also, who's this? This is actually Odysseus. One of my favorites is the Odyssey. Since I was a child, I love the Odyssey. Now, Odysseus is separated from where he's supposed to be. He's separated actually from who he is. He's separated from his homeland of Ithaca. It's an island where he's the king, and he has a wife, and he has a son, and he's coming back from the Trojan War. He gets displaced from his place. And actually, these suitors have taken over his place. The suitors This is a famous painting, but these are the suitors. They all want, each suitor wants to sleep with his wife and also kill his son Telemachus. They want to sleep with Penelope. That's Penelope. She's weaving. Every night she tears it back apart. That's kind of another metaphor of self-sabotage. You weave this beautiful thing and then you undo it. That also has to do with the higher self. But they want to take his wife, kill his son, Telemachus. It's also, O Brother, Where Art Thou is based on the Odyssey too. He's displaced from where he is. Well, how many suitors are there in the Odyssey? How many suitors have displaced Odysseus? If you know the answer, don't tell. It's a math problem. My math is not as hard as some of the math that you've seen. I was an English major. But they count it out in Book 13 of the Odyssey. Some of these are islands near Ithaca, but there's 52 suitors from Dulichion, 24 from Sami, 20 from Zakynthus, and 12 from Ithaca itself, which adds up to, as you guys have already figured out in your heads probably, 108. 108 suitors are displacing Odysseus from his place. So I would argue that the cycle of precession has to do with our disconnection. So now I want to talk about another myth that has to do with trauma. And that is maybe a familiar story to many here, the story of Adam and Eve. And before anyone gets uncomfortable, because I'm talking, maybe you've had a traumatic experience somewhere along the line with literal interpretation of the story, I am convinced that the entire scriptures of the Bible from start to finish are based on metaphor. All the figures and episodes are based on metaphor. In fact, they're based on celestial metaphor. But clearly we have trauma being demonstrated in this story, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I want to show you a little bit of how it works. I'm not going to lay out a lot of explanation of how the myths connect to the stars. I'll just show a little bit. But this is how this story connects to the stars. These are the stars in the night sky. I'm using stellarium. Now I'm going to invert the colors. So don't shield your eyes, because I'm going to turn everything that's dark into light and everything that's light into dark. But the reason I do that is because I'm going to outline some constellations, and it's much easier to see with this light background. So I'm going to outline the constellations of Adam and Eve and the serpent. This is the three constellations here: the man, the woman, and the serpent. And that's the constellations. Boötes is up top there, the herdsman. Virgo plays Eve. Virgo in this story is played by, Eve in this story is played by Virgo. It's like actors. There's only so many famous actors. Like, oh, wait, Brad Pitt is Achilles again? Oh, wait, no, Brad Pitt is in, that story about The Big Short. Oh, there's Brad Pitt again, and then he's in True Romance. Well, they have to reuse him. So Virgo plays a lot of different characters. She plays Eve, and then our serpent in this myth will be played by the lovely Hydra, the serpent. And that's, by the way, that's why Eve is the one that the serpent talks to. You can see. It doesn't have anything to do with women being more culpable than men or something. There it is in the sky. Now, as you all know who watch the sky, the objects in the sky rotate from east to west. And that's because we're on this flat earth. No, I'm just kidding. I put out these videos. Sorry. I put out these videos, and I pour all this time into these videos, and then all the comments are like, this is great, but why don't you believe in the flat earth? But anyway, we're looking to the south. We're looking to the south. So objects in the sky rotate from east to west because we are on this sphere that's rotating towards the east. But if you want to convince me that it's a flat earth, you can talk to me after. But everything rises in the east and sets in the west for whatever reason. Rises in the east and sets in the west. The stars do that just like the sun does that. So these stars are going to rotate, east to west, I just showed it. They're going to rotate out of the sky from east to west. So they're going to sink out of the sky in this order. Who's going to sink out first? First the serpent, then the woman, then the man. And if you look in Genesis 3, you will see that that's the exact order that they are addressed by the Lord when they're thrown out of Eden. First the serpent, and a judgment is pronounced on each one, and the serpent is told, upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I'll just draw in the the horizon here, you can see he is eating dust right there. And there's another judgment that's pronounced upon the serpent. Those of you who went to a lot of Sunday school will know he's also told that, what? I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. What is this talking about? This is very clear celestial metaphor. This is the seed of the woman. That's a big baby right there. This is the constellation Ophiuchus, super important constellation in the myths of the world. Now, why is that the seed of the woman, the offspring of the woman? She's going across the sky on her back with her legs elevated and apart. She's giving birth to, sometimes Ophiuchus, sometimes she gives birth to different constellations, but often it's Ophiuchus. That's the seed of the woman. Now, who's the seed of the serpent then? It's not Hydra, it's actually Scorpio. This is Scorpio, the seed, the offspring of the serpent. Now, Scorpio, you may be scratching your heads and saying, wait, Scorpio's a scorpion. Actually, Scorpio plays a snake or a serpent in more myth, I've found, than a scorpion. In fact, it often plays a multi-headed serpent. Sometimes it plays a multi-headed dragon that's waiting to eat the child of the woman in the book of Revelation. You can see that. But this is, right now, it's the seed of the serpent is Scorpio. There's Scorpio. And the very next line in the Bible says, it shall bruise thy head, it being the seed of the woman shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So it's unmistakable that we're talking about the seed of the woman is standing on the text gives you a celestial clue that we're talking about celestial figures. That means, I would argue, that it's metaphor, not a literal Adam and Eve, because we see it right here. And so, well, what's it talking about? If it's a metaphor, what's it a metaphor about? It's about us. We have to see ourselves in the myth. Let me just continue with a little bit more rotating out of the sky. So when the woman rotates out, she's told she's going to have pain in childbirth, right? Well, we just talked about she looks like she's giving birth. And then Adam, finally, he gets thrown out. And when he is rotating out of the heavens, the Lord says, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou shalt return unto the ground. He's returning unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, dust thou art, unto dust shalt thou return. He came out of the east, now he's heading back down into the dust. And actually, I don't show it here. For interest of time, I'm not going to get into it too much, but also, when he's rotating out of the heavens, when they're getting kicked out of the heavens, the text says in Genesis 3:24 that something is placed at the east of Eden. East of Eden became a movie with James Dean, right? East of Eden, at the east, we have rising, as they're sinking down out of the sky, we have rising the cherubims with the flaming sword is the constellation Perseus, and also perhaps Andromeda. Andromeda plays an angel in a lot of stories, like the story of Balaam. Balaam and the talking donkey, Balaam and the ass, is Perseus. But anyway, Perseus is at the east of Eden. So I would argue that we've located Eden. Now I know we have other speakers who've also said maybe Eden is in the north of, near Göbekli Tepe, maybe. But in this myth, I would argue that the Eden is actually paradise. They call it paradise. It's the stars of the heaven. They're getting thrown down out of the stars of heaven. What does that have to do with us? It's talking about our situation. I'm convinced that this motion of sinking down out of the sky is describing, in metaphorical terms, what we experience. It's saying you are coming down out of the realm of spirit, the upper elements of air and fire. That's where the stars are. That's the realm of spirit. And we rotate down into this body of clay, earth and water. The lower two elements are earth and water. You know, you watch the stars or the sun either sink down into earth, or if you're lucky and you're in California and you're looking out in the beautiful ocean like we are here, you can see them sink down into the water. But it's the lower elements of earth and water, and that's why we're made out of clay in so many myths around the world. Clay is the lower elements, but animated by a divine spark from the realm of the gods, like Prometheus steals the fire and puts it in the clay men and women that he's created. So it's talking about our traumatic descent from the realm of spirit down into the realm of physical, just like the dying God that I talked about. The same message, the lost connection to the self. So do we have some trauma in the story of Adam and Eve? Yes. There's a lot of trauma in the story of Adam and Eve. Obviously, they're disconnected from nature, right? They're told, now in the sweat of your face you're going to eat bread. You can't have the garden isn't just going to feed you anymore. And disconnected from, oh, now women, you have to have super pain in childbirth. And they're also disconnected from each other, right? When God says, Adam, did you eat the fruit? What does he say? I can imagine Eve's face. It says, the woman you gave me, she did it. She gave it to me, and then I ate. So they're separated from each other. It's exactly what Dr. Levine was talking about. We're separated from ourselves, from our bodies, from our families, from one another, and from the wider nature, the universe, and from the divine. And these are celestial figures. And look at this painting from the 1500s, late 1500s, early 1600s, Pietro Mera of Venice. They incorporate the outlines of this got passed down. Eve has a distinctive outstretched arm marked by the star Vindemiatrix. She has this outstretched arm. There's Eve, played by actresses Virgo in this one. And then we have Boötes, the herdsman. This artist has incorporated some of the aspects there. But the trauma, the separation from ourselves is actually, the text tells us right here, they were both naked. This is in Genesis 2, before this whole falling out happens. The man and his wife, they were both naked and were not ashamed. And then, right after that, they knew that they were naked and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Actually, it doesn't say aprons. The text has a little footnote. Things to gird about is what the original word means. But anyway, they're no longer comfortable in their own skin. They're separated from their own self. They like when we say someone's not comfortable in their own skin, it's like they're not comfortable with who they are anymore. Has anyone ever felt that way? I know everyone's felt that way because Dr. Levine, not only does Dr. Levine tell us that we all feel that way, or virtually all of us have experienced this disconnection, but the myths themselves are telling us this. And so they sewed fig leaves. Here's an early, it's kind of a cool, from the Roman catacombs of around AD 300. But does this mean that I think we should all run around naked? No. I think it's a metaphor. It's talking about we're not comfortable with who we are anymore. We're separated from ourselves. And actually it says that God gave them coats of skin. Well, I think that's a metaphor. We all have been given a coat of skin, right? We're walking around in it right now. So what is this essential self that we've been disconnected from? What is the essential self? Well, I would argue essence means what something really is. The essence of something is what it really is at its deepest core. So our essential self is actually who we really are in our deepest core. How could we possibly become alienated from that? By something called our mind, our psyche, our persona. The word persona, from which we get person. Does anyone know? It comes from actually an ancient Etruscan word that worked its way into Latin and gave us the word person. But it means a mask. Our persona is a mask that we craft, but it separates us from our essential self. And you may be interested to know, and you may already know, that the ancient myths teach us that the self, the mind, is not the self. It's not our essential self anyway. The mind, in the ancient myths of, the ancient scriptures of India, the ancient Sanskrit texts, in the Upanishads, one of the Upanishads is the Katha Upanishad. And it gives this beautiful metaphor saying that the body is like a chariot. Oops. Oh, well. And I guess I didn't have body labeled under chariot, but I forgot that. But the horses that pull the chariot are like the senses, and also some texts say the emotions. They are pulling the chariot all over the place. But we have to control those horses or they'll run away with us. And so we have the reins. And in the Katha Upanishad, it says the reins are the mind. Oh, okay, that makes sense. The mind controls the horses. But wait a minute. Then the mind cannot be, The mind cannot be who's driving the chariot. There's got to be someone else. And the Bhagavad Gita actually dramatizes this in the Bhagavad Gita. Who's holding the reins of the chariot in the Bhagavad Gita is the Lord Krishna himself. Krishna is holding the reins. That's who's supposed to be holding the reins, the essential self. The essential self is supposed to be holding the reins. Krishna is actually the non-combatant charioteer. He's the essential self, but we still have to do it. But the problem is we don't let the essential self steer the chariot. The mind says, hold on, I got to be in control. This mind that we created, this persona that we've created, because of trauma, because of actually understandable things, we get disconnected from our essential self, and the mind says, I got to grab the steering wheel. I'm going to get us through this. So that's what happens, this mind persona. So let's talk about an illustration of this, not from the myths, and then we'll go to the myths. There's an almost perfect illustration of this not letting, this mind that doesn't want to let go, this persona that we've created over long years of trauma, from a wonderful story by a guy who taught myths at the college level named J.R.R. Tolkien. Everyone knows J.R.R. Tolkien, taught Old English myth. He wrote, anyway, not to get off track, but I hope we've all seen The Lord of the Rings. If not, this will be a little bit of a spoiler, or maybe you're familiar with the book. But there's a character in The Lord of the Rings who creates a persona over long years of trauma, not necessarily a healthy persona, over long, long years of trauma, and won't let go, and that is, yes, perfect, everyone knew. So I led up to it just right. And he says, no one likes you. You don't have any friends, right? There's this wonderful part where Smeagol is having this conversation with his persona, this mechanism that he's created, this golem character that he's created. He even has physical symptoms, right? He has this like hacking golem. That's how our mind can actually influence our body. He has this conversation where he's like, I'm going to get rid of this terrible persona that's wrecking everything. And he says, not listening. See? The golem character says, you don't have any friends. And he says, I'm not listening. And he says, you're a liar. You're a thief. You're a murderer. And Smeagol says, I hate you. I hate you. And then the golem character says, where would you be without me? I saved us. It was me. We survived because of me. That's what your mind says. I can't let go. I'm the one who's getting us through this. I'm steering on this dangerous, curvy road with fog and rocks and a cliff on one side. If I let go, we're going over. We survived because of me. You can't get me out of the driver's seat. And then Smeagol says, leave now and never come back. And then Golem says, what did you say? How does it work to say, leave now and never come back to your mind? Does that work? Does it work in the movie? No. That's not how we get reconciled. That's not how we get the mind in its right relationship. So the myths actually show us this. But is it two people? Is Golem two different people? It's one character. Another Lord of the Rings, just real quick. Who's this guy? Now, are there two Gandalfs in Lord of the Rings or one? Oh my goodness, there's two. Which one is this? This is Gandalf the Grey, and then, oh, there goes Gandalf the Grey. But then he comes back as Gandalf the White. Is it two different people? No. It's dramatizing something about our condition. Now, J.R.R. Tolkien knew a lot about the myths, but the myths do this with twins. We have so many twins in myth. Is it two different people? Usually it's a mortal twin and a divine twin. And often one twin dies. Castor and Pollux. Castor is mortal. Pollux is divine. Castor actually goes down into the underworld, and Pollux has to go save him. Polydeuces in Greek. Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Gilgamesh dies. Gilgamesh is hairy. Just like Jacob and Esau, Esau is hairy. Anyway, there's twins around the world, but they're not two different people. It's dramatizing how we get back in touch, how we recover this essential self. And there's actually twins in the New Testament. And before you get uncomfortable again, because I'm talking about now, I'm going to talk about a Jesus story. I believe this is all about you, and it's literal. It's not literal persons. I believe it's showing us how we. This is a very powerful illustration. There's twins in the New Testament. There's this guy named Thomas Didymus, Thomas the twin. Who's his twin? We'll find out in a minute. But I believe this is celestial metaphor. You can see it in this painting. Look at the hand of Jesus is over the wrist. The Renaissance painters almost always do this with hand gestures that relate to constellations. Oops, did I somehow skip? Hold on. I guess it's coming up next. Sorry. Here it is again. Sorry. I took everyone out of the moment. But come back. The hand gestures. See, Jesus has his hand over the wrist again. That's weird. Why is he doing that? Thomas, he's saying, put it right here. Put your fingers right here. This is celestial metaphor. These hand gestures, you see it in Da Vinci a lot. Line up with constellations. This is the constellation of Capricorn. Thomas, I would argue, is a Capricorn type figure. Why? He's super stubborn, right? What's Capricorn? A goat. And Thomas is this stubborn goat. It's right down at the turning of the year. It's like, don't doubt and look back after the winter solstice. But look at that. We got a little flicker. That's to hypnotize you into believing everything that I say. Sorry about that. But Capricorn, look at, he's got distinctive horns out to the left. It's actually a very large constellation in the night sky. Stellarium uses this perspective. But when you go out and see Capricorn, it's big. It's two triangles. See the two triangles? Let's just quickly look over here. Can you guys still hear me? Look at the fingers are the horns. Who's making the triangle of the head? That's the hand of Jesus over his wrist. Then the elbow is always bent. That's the legs that form the other triangle of Capricorn. And then there's this little bobtail in the background. And you can see the little bobtail, that's usually made by someone else's hand gesture in the background. You've got this hand. See that hand? The one person's got a hand that's down like this that makes a little bobtail that's actually present in the constellation. Then you've got another guy with a finger pointing up like this. That's actually the head of Sagittarius, I would argue. But I'm telling you, this is a metaphor, celestial metaphor. What does it mean? Well, let's take a look at the, oh yeah, you can see it. Okay. Oh, who's Jesus then in this one? Well, he's pointing to the spear wound in his side. This is Aquarius, right next to Capricorn. Aquarius sometimes gets speared in the side. In the Odyssey, the way that characters get killed usually tells you which constellation they are. So if they get speared in the gut, it's usually an Aquarius. And usually if they're speared in the gut, they will be described earlier in the text as a headlong runner or a swift runner. Oh, this swift runner. Anytime I meet a swift runner in the Iliad, I know, he's going to get a spear. See that? So Capricorn the goat is pointing right to the spear wound. Okay? And Jesus even says in the Olivet Discourse that I am the sign. Out of all the zodiac signs, which one do you think would be the sign of the Son of Man? We've got all these different animals, and then we have Aquarius in the zodiac. So that's the sign of the Son of Man that separates the sheep from the goats. Well, there's Capricorn. Where's the sheep? That would be Aries the ram. Now, all my knowledgeable astrologers would say, hold on, I know we have Pisces is in there. Okay, he's separating the sheep and the fish from the goats, but they just say sheep from the goats. But he's definitely separating the sheep from the goats on his right hand and his left hand. Okay, so this is a celestial, but it's very profound. It's about reconnecting with our higher self. Okay, it's about Thomas, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. And the other disciples therefore said unto him, we have seen the Lord. And Thomas says, what did you say? I doubt it. That's nonsense. He says, that's ridiculous. Unless I shall see in his hands the print of the nails and put my finger into the print of the nails and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. Called Didymus. By the way, Didymus is a Greek word that means twin. Like diploma, or there's a dinosaur called Diplodocus or Diplodocus. Di means two, dimethyltryptamine, or Didymus. He's a twin. But we're never told in the canonical Gospels who is his twin. But we are told in the Gnostic Gospels. Oh, maybe it is in the canonical Gospels. Someone can tell me later where it is. I don't find it in the canonical Gospels who is the specific twin of Thomas. But in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, which was found in the Nag Hammadi corpus that was discovered in the 1940s, it was buried. The Gnostic texts were buried, the ones that we found. The Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, Jesus directly says to Thomas, "You are my twin." Now, anyone at a Christmas, you set up the manger scene. Anyone seen twins in the manger scene? No. See? So we don't... If you're taking it literally, that's a problem that Thomas is the twin of Jesus, if there's no twin in the manger description. But if you're not taking it literally, it's not a problem. So the Gnostic text didn't have a problem with Jesus saying to Thomas, "You're my twin," but it didn't make it into the canon as far as I know. But let's talk about this attitude of Thomas who says, "Except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails." So Jesus is coming, and he says, what does he say to the disciples? The first day he comes, he says, "Peace unto you." Then he comes on the very first day of the resurrection. Then 8 days later, the disciples were within and Thomas with them. And then Jesus, as the doors being shut, stood in the midst and said again, what does he say? "Peace unto you." The "be" is actually not in the text. It just says, "Peace unto you." Remember the trauma of the Garden of Eden where we're separated from ourselves. We're divided from ourselves. This is about reconnecting. If you get back into the right relationship, that's what he's talking about. "Peace unto you." I'm going to repair that division. Then saith he to Thomas, "Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing." Now, why is Thomas separated? How is Thomas separated from Jesus? By his doubts. Anyone? Nobody in here probably ever has any doubts. I sometimes have some. But doubts are like throwing your mind forward into the future or backwards into the past. And that's what, right? Doubts come from the mind running all over the place. And that's actually not a bad thing to be able to do, but it can get out of control. And Jesus says, touch, right here, touch. He says, come back to the present, right now. Come right to this present moment. And does Jesus deal with Thomas in a hateful way? Does he say, "Thomas, you are my absolute worst disciple. I cannot believe you. In fact, I'm going to obliterate you right now." Poof. Now we don't have that stupid egoic mind anymore. Disciples, aren't you glad we got rid of Thomas? No. He actually deals with him in compassion. And he brings him to the present. And then Thomas in the story says, "My Lord and my God." Okay, I already talked about that. He's repairing that. Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. Brings him back to the present. And Thomas answered and said to him, "My Lord and my God." And that is putting the reins back in the hand of this is the right relationship between the essential self and the egoic mind. Our egoic mind actually has a purpose. That's the reins. But it can't be like Golem. That's like, I am not letting go. And if you try, this is putting the hands back into the reins back into the hands of the higher self, the essential self, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Christ in this story. Now, before anyone thinks, boy, you're really heavy on the Bible stories. Well, I'm showing you Bhagavad Gita here, but let me show you one other. This is a beautiful illustration, and it's not as well known, but I think it shows the very same thing. Eros and Psyche, the ancient myth of Eros and Psyche, sometimes called Cupid and Psyche. Cupid is the Latin name, Eros is the Greek name, but it's not a little chubby infant, with wings. Eros is a full-grown god, beautiful, handsome god. And the story of Eros and Psyche, Psyche is this beautiful maiden, so beautiful. Everyone in the town cannot get over how beautiful this young maiden that's grown up in their midst. And unfortunately, some people in the town start to take it a little too far and say she's more beautiful than, the goddess. In this case, Venus or Aphrodite in this particular story. That is always a recipe for disaster, right? Because we get our gifts from the realm of the gods. the gifts come from the gods themselves, from the realm of potential. Then it gets realized in the realm of, that comes from the infinite realm. So when you say that the gifts are above their source, that's an inversion of the proper order, and it always results in disaster. And so Venus in this story sends down plagues and horrors upon the town because they've been so unthinking as to compare her beauty as being greater than the beauty of the goddess. And they say, wait a minute, okay, I got it. Psyche is the cause of this problem. Let's chase her out of the town. They chase her out of the town. She's disconsolate. She's wandering in the mountains, wandering away from the town. Everyone's chased her out. She's like, I'm the cause of all this suffering. And she wanders up to a high, high cliff. And then she says, I think I'm just going to end it all. And she steps off the cliff. But she's caught in midair by the handsome god Eros, who's in love with her. He's seen her. Now, who's his mother? Venus. So we're going to have a problem. We're going to have a problem with the mother-in-law here. But he stays invisible. So see, even if you haven't heard this story, you've heard this pattern. He stays invisible and takes her down to this beautiful but secluded castle where she has everything she wants. And invisible attendants wait on her every need. I think I would like a delicious breakfast right now. And then, shoo, and it comes a delicious breakfast. And she gets to be the lover of Eros. But he says, I'm sorry, you can never see me. We can only be together at night when it's totally dark in the room. And, we'll share the same bed, but you cannot see me. And if you ever try and see me, that will end our relationship. And so, of course, Psyche at first is pretty happy, but then she begins to have doubts. And then, in this story, her two sisters, who are very jealous of her, come. She says, I want to see my sisters. And then they come, and they stoke her doubts even further, and they convince her, your husband must be some monstrous serpent or something. And she's like, I guess, he never lets me see him. And so, of course, one night, after they've made love, it's dark, and he's asleep, she sneaks out of bed. She gets a lamp, and she lights the lamp, tiptoes back over, only to see the beautiful god Eros. But, of course, a little drop of oil from the lamp falls on his shoulder. And he wakes up, and he sees Psyche, and he sees she has the lamp. And he says, why, oh, why did you doubt me? We could have been so happy together. And then, with his wings, he just flies out the window, says goodbye, and she's lost him because of her doubts. Could have had a beautiful relationship with her higher self. I mean, Psyche, the name kind of gives it away. She's our egoic self. She's our psyche that we've constructed that's full of doubts. But I'm happy to report, everyone's all, that was the most depressing. I'm happy to report that Psyche and Eros, they do recover their relationship, but only after a lot of misery for Psyche. She has to search for him very hard. And in fact, he has to bring her back from death with the kiss of love. That's what you're seeing right here in this beautiful artwork by Antonio Canova. He had some name like the Prince of Marble or something. He was really admired in his time. This is Eros awakens Psyche with the kiss of love. Only after she actually dies in the story. She has to really, really look. Why? Because Golem has to let go of the reins, right? She actually has to die and then be brought back. So you see in these myths hints of how we recover our essential self. And it involves actually love. It actually involves compassion. Our essential self has compassion on our egoic self. Our egoic self got there because it's dealing with trauma. It's a defense mechanism, a perfectly understandable defense mechanism that we've crafted. But our higher self understands that. It doesn't hate our essential self. Hating your essential self and trying to get rid of it that way doesn't work. But what does work is coming back to the present and dealing with your essential self in compassion but not hating and getting rid of your essential self. It actually has a role to play. Even Gandalf says of Smeagol, he has a role to play. Our essential self has a role to play. Our egoic self has a role to play, but our essential self is right there. Right now, your essential self is right there. You can get back in touch with your essential self through having compassion on your egoic self. And actually, I think when you're dealing with other people, you can also maybe think about, you know what, they probably have an egoic self. Maybe they don't even know that it's in control. You know, maybe they had some trauma. Certainly they did. So what I would say is, to finish off, don't listen to me. Don't listen to me. The myths, I'm convinced the myths have everything we need. And they're trying to tell us. And it's all right there. So what I recommend is that you go and listen to the myths. And thank you very much. Thanks so much.